I really wanted one of those t-shirt cannons, but it wasn't in the budget, so. Welcome to the National Conference for Media Reform. So glad you're here. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Craig Aaron. I'm the president and CEO of Free Press. Y'all having a good time so far? All right. I am thrilled to report that in addition to the thousands of you here with us today, thousands more will join us online and watching live on Free Speech TV. Free Speech TV is from right here in Denver. They're broadcasting this. They're doing interviews throughout the weekend. Please check them out. I want to thank our friend Chris Thomas from 5 Steps Forward, who is providing our live stream. Chris Thomas. You can watch that at freepress.net. You can watch that on Democracy Now!'s website. You can watch that on Hank Shockley's website, shockley.com, Bill Moyer's website, and of course, Free Speech TV at freespeech.org. Social media people, I see a lot of laptops, I see a lot of cell phones. Hashtag NCMR13, use it, love it, spread the word. All right, so I expect we're going to give you a lot of reasons over the next couple days to jump out of your seats and yell real loud. But I thought maybe we would try to practice a little bit here at the top. And so I'm gonna call you out. If you hear me say something that describes you, you should jump out of your seat and yell real loud. So we're going to start with the people who are paid to do that. So many people have contributed to this event, and I want to acknowledge them. So if you're actually in the room and you're on the Free Press staff, jump to your feet. Stand up. All right. How about the Free Press Board of Directors, if you're here? Please stand up. All right. We couldn't do this event without so many supporters. This is not a money-making event. Anything that we bring in goes into the event itself. We have been blessed with the support of a lot of foundations, too numerous to mention here, but we are so grateful for them. And so many individuals, too. There are a lot of people in this room who paid more than the cost of their registration so that other people who otherwise couldn't afford it could be with us here this weekend. So I want to thank them. And that doesn't even count all of the people who have made donations throughout the year. So if you made a donation when you registered, if you ever made a donation to Free Press, if you really intend to make a donation while you're here, I hope you'll stand up so we can identify you. No, so we can thank you. So please, any supporters and donors, thank you so much. All right. Now look, we have a lot of great speakers here this weekend, but we don't do these events just so you can see politicians and celebrities and performers. We do these events so those people, the people who are going to follow me here on stage, so they can actually see you. So they can see the thousands of people here and know that there are thousands and thousands, millions more across the country. So I hope you will rise to your feet. If you've ever been to a National Conference for Media Reform before, were you in Boston? Were you in Minneapolis? Were you in Memphis? Were you in St. Louis? Maybe you were in Madison, Wisconsin 10 years ago at the first conference. All right. Now if this is, no stand-ups, keep standing. If this is your first conference, your first National Conference for Media Reform, you should stand up too. All right. If you're not standing, you're in the wrong place. Now that you're all standing, I want you to give it up for somebody who did probably more than anyone to make this event a success, my friend and colleague, Mary Alice Crim.
Hi, my name is Mary Alice Crim. For the past 10 months, I've been organizing this conference alongside my colleagues Misty Perez-Trudson and Candace Clements. That's right, that's right. Let's hear it for Misty and Candace. At Free Press, we created this conference for all of you who believe in your hearts that changing our world starts with changing our media. We're gathering this weekend to push back against the tide of corporate control of our media. We're gathering to reclaim our airwaves. And we're gathering because we want a just and sustainable world. Now, I have a feeling that many of you are with me on that, but let's hear it from you. Is that why you're here? All right, that's what I thought. So, I have a few questions for you all. Raise your hand if you agree with me. We all watch TV, listen to the radio, read magazines, and use the internet, right? All right. That's right. I know some of you out there watch a lot of fluff TV like I do. Okay. If you think you've seen something sexist in the media in the last week, raise your hand. If you think you've seen something racist in the media recently, raise your hand. Something homophobic. If you have seen way too many attack ads and are tired of seeing attack ads, raise your hand. Raise your hand if you have had it with skyrocketing cable, internet, and cell phone bills. Yeah, that's a good one, right? Raise your hand if you want local, hard-hitting coverage of the issues impacting your community. Now, raise your hand if you have had enough and want to change our media. Keep them up. Now let's look around. That's pretty much all of us. And that's why we're here this weekend. This weekend is all about changing the media and building a better democracy. It's about building a just and sustainable world. So, what's on the agenda? You can check out your printed program or use your smartphone at freepress.net/conference to plot out your schedule. And I promise that over the next few days, you'll be inspired by barn burner speeches here on this stage. You'll meet amazing activists from around the country. You'll learn new things from the powerhouse presenters we've lined up and the people you meet in the halls and at the parties. You can check out award-winning films, get creative in the media and technology sandbox, talk to your favorite writers, take in poetry, music, art galleries, and let loose on the dance floor. I hope to see many of you shaking your media maker with us tonight at the McNichols building just down the street. You definitely want to be there. Throughout the weekend, we'll dive into issues at the intersection of media, technology, and democracy. The program explores the themes of culture, creators, and media makers, internet, technology, and innovation, policy and politics, journalism and public media, and social justice and the fight for media equality. As you explore everything the conference has to offer, be sure to get to know the people sitting next to you. Chat with folks in the halls and explore Denver. Share your stories, exchange ideas, and gear up to make real and lasting change. Because if we stand together, we can beat back corporate power and corrupt politics. We can work for policies that actually protect the public interest. We can get a media that represents real people, that looks like our families, and that covers the issues we're dealing with at home in our communities. And we can win major victories that will be felt across the country for generations to come. And we can have a lot of fun along the way. So let's get to it. Thanks for being here.
Sorry, I really love that joke, so I can't get over it. Thank you, Mary Alice. Just wanted to share a quick story. I've known David Sirota for quite some time. We actually went to college together at Northwestern, and a couple years later, when I was an editor at In These Times magazine, I published a book, and it was lucky enough to be reviewed in the Washington Post. I want to emphasize that this review was about this big. But, you know, I was visiting my wife's parents. This is before we were married. And they're in Washington, D.C., and I thought they would be so impressed. And in the morning, saw my future mother-in-law, and she came into the room, and she said, "Do you know what I just read?" You know, I puffed out my chest. I was so excited. And she said, "I just read this amazing profile of somebody who went to Northwestern. Do you know David Sirota?" And it wasn't long after that David got out of Washington, D.C., generally a smart move, and moved west. Since then, he's built an impressive career as a political strategist, as a TV commentator, as an essayist for Harper's and the New York Times Magazine, as the host of an incredibly popular and sorely missed radio show right here in Denver. And he's also the author of 3 best-selling books. I'm thrilled he could be here with us today. He's going to take over as our MC in a moment. So please, let's give it up for the son-in-law my mother-in-law always wanted, David Sirota.
I had never heard that story, I swear. You're the son-in-law that your mother-in-law wants. Thank you all for being here. It's great to see all of you here. It's really great to have such a big conference, such an important conference in Denver, Colorado. And it's an important place for this conference to be because of what's going on here in our media ecosystem and how what's going on here in so many ways tracks what's happening nationally in not a very uplifting kind of way. And I want to get into a little bit of that, about why the geography of this conference, why it being here right now is so important in a little bit. But I want to start out with just a couple of comments that I think will get a lot of amens from a crowd like this, a crowd that's aware of what's going on in the media. But I don't know about you, but I think that all of the issues that we've worked together on when it comes to media reform and understanding how important the media is, they have all become so now obvious as a huge part of the crisis facing this country. We just celebrated, if you can call it that, celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the Iraq War, a war that was, at least in part, and many people believe in large part, initiated because there wasn't really any kind of diversity of media voices in the lead up to that war. In fact, the media played a role of amplifier of those in power, those pushing radical ideas in power, and not an adversary to power. We are now years into the Wall Street collapse with the same dynamic which led up to that collapse, which was a triumphalist media, a media that did not have a diversity of voices and certainly wasn't a media with adversarial voices, essentially saying nothing or cheering on what was happening on Wall Street. We are now a few years into, and depending on how you count the time, many years into a situation where the media has been telling the public that we essentially have to cut the most popular, most successful social programs that have built the middle class of this country. If you read the newspaper, you watch television, you think that cutting Social Security, you're told that cutting Social Security and Medicare is a mainstream position over and over and over again, even though it's not. We're also years into a paradigm on an issue like immigration, where even as the country becomes more diverse, the homogenous media tells us that the politics of divide and conquer, the politics of calling, really using an epithet, making an epithet out of the word illegal, is fine and dandy and A-OK in a country that's becoming less white and more diverse. We're years now into a media telling us over and over and over again that there is one and only definition of education, quote, reform. And education reform means to effectively privatize our education system and undermine our public education system. There is almost no debate in the media about that, because there is not a diversity of voices in the media. And I'm not saying, in highlighting all of these examples, that those positions in support of those policies, even though I oppose those policies, that those positions shouldn't get an airing. What I'm saying is what I think we all know, which is that those positions are entitled to a voice in the media, just like the position of most Americans is entitled to a voice in that media. And that is not what's being represented. And there was a Pew poll out very recently, which I'm sure many of you saw, which showed that most Americans say they are not getting what they want from the media today. That most Americans feel that they are not getting the product that they want. And I think that is an expression, however rudimentary, of the public also recognizing that its democracy is not working because its media is not working. In other words, I don't think that's just a consumer preference poll. I also think that whether consciously or not, that is our country saying that the media is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, and that is a problem for our democracy, for this experiment that we call democracy. And all of this is playing out not just in the national media. This is playing out in the most local of local media. I wrote a very long article for Harper's Magazine recently about how it has worked here in Denver, Colorado, and how Denver, Colorado is the national example of what happens. We had two newspapers, and one of our newspapers went out of business. And it has created the paradoxical situation which is being replicated in cities all over the country, where the newspaper industry is facing financial pressures and seemingly weakening, and it is weakening in some ways. But paradoxically, the newspapers that still remain actually wield more political power than they ever have, because they are the last remaining voices. They are the only voices that fund on-the-ground journalism, even though it's less and less. The the radio stations and TV stations are often simply ripping and reading, as the industry term is. They simply rip out of the newspaper, read what the newspaper reports. And so the owners of newspapers have more power over what we see, read, and hear than ever before. And it's the same thing with the internet. A huge amount of the content on the internet is simply echoing what is in that newspaper. And it's not a coincidence that as this phenomenon has happened, more and more politically active millionaires and billionaires have bought up these newspapers from publicly traded corporations. Not that publicly traded corporations are so great, but when it's in the hands of essentially new era Citizen Kanes, people who are ideologically committed to using their monopoly power to make their subjective political ideology a reality, that is a crisis for not just national democracy, but for local democracy. And dealing with that crisis is at the center of every other political crisis in this country. There are only two issues, in my estimation, which touch every other issue in our politics. So I don't care if your main issue is the environment, or your main issue is health care, or the main thing you care about is Social Security. There are two issues which touch every issue. One is money in politics. The second is media and politics, and specifically, who owns the media. If money dominates politics, then people have no say in their political representation. Similarly, if there is not a diversity of media, and if your community and this country in general is a monopoly media situation, then the people who own those monopoly media, the monopolists themselves, will be the ones who have the say, and not the rest of us. And this is an absolutely fundamental problem. Because here's the way, the lesson I learned in working in Congress, working in politics, and then writing my first book. It was called Hostile Takeover. That corruption does not operate just with envelopes of cash to legislators, although it does operate that way sometimes. The most powerful form of corruption is the corruption that says if we create a storyline that preferences, if not guarantees, specific outcomes, the envelopes of cash never need to be handed over. If the only thing that Congress is debating, if the only thing that's being debated on TV is which kind of Social Security cuts should be enacted, as opposed to whether any should be enacted, as opposed to whether Social Security shouldn't be cut but expanded, if you narrow the story, you narrow the outcomes to guarantee outcomes that do not represent the public. So no matter what issue is your number one issue, the issue of media, the issue of who owns the media, the issue of your local monopolist, whether it's here in Denver, Colorado, or wherever you're coming from, the issue of that monopoly power is the fundamental issue of our day. And I know I'm talking to people who understand that, but you have to know that your work and your activism is absolutely crucial to every other issue. Thank you so much for coming to Denver, and thanks for your work.
All right, David Sirota. He'll be back here in a second. Some people have been asking, why did you bring this conference to Denver? We decided to bring this event to Denver partly because every time we've been here for any size event, we always had such a great turnout. So much great local participation. So thank you for that. I won't lie, we also came to Denver because Colorado now plays such a decisive role in national politics, in electing our presidents. That means, unfortunately for you, you have to endure a lot of political attack ads. Sorry about that. We saw, as David just described, we saw how Denver struggled with runaway media consolidation, how it's been at the center of conversations about the future of journalism ever since the closing of the Rocky Mountain News. But it's also a site of innovation and experimentation in community and independent media. It has one of the best community radio stations in the country, KGNU. There are amazing things happening over at Denver Open Media. You should check them out tonight if you get the chance. And there are new things happening in public broadcasting, in investigative journalism, in technology, which might be models for what can be done everywhere. We've had such a great and warm welcome here in Denver. I want to thank in particular our local host committee. If you are on the local host committee and you're here, maybe you can stand up. Or if you're not here, don't. Thank you, local host committee. They're out recruiting more people. We have received an incredibly warm welcome, and we're grateful as well that the mayor of Denver could be here to offer you a few welcoming words of his own. So please, a warm welcome for Denver Mayor Michael B. Hancock.
Good afternoon, and let me thank Craig for that introduction. And I want to welcome each and every one of you to the Mile High City. I know we have a large contingency from Denver, but for those of you who are from here or here from outside the state of Denver or the state of Colorado, welcome to Denver, Colorado. Let me thank Mary Alice, the conference manager, for coordinating the event and choosing Denver as a destination for this year's National Conference for Media Reform. I also want to thank Aaron and the whole team for the exceptional work that they do for the Free Press. And of course, to all the local presenters and performers who are here attending this year's conference, Denver students, musicians, journalists, and many more. I am so excited that you are here. What a great opportunity for you to be here. Now, let me just say to you all, particularly for those who are outside the state, I would be remiss as mayor of this great city if I didn't stop and invite you to not only enjoy this great city while you're here, but to get out and spend as much money as you can in our great city. We are still coming out of this recession, and we need you to spend as many dollars as you can in our downtown. How you like our downtown Denver? You enjoying it? It is on fire today. This is like a national, it's become kind of an annual tradition here in Denver. Opening day for the Colorado Rockies. And everyone is in downtown Denver in their purple. That's why I'm dressed in purple. Whether they're going to the game or not, they're downtown enjoying the beer, the pubs, and the restaurants. And we invite you to do the same while you're in downtown. If you get a break from this conference, go and catch the Colorado Rockies. They were up 4-1 when I left the game just moments ago. Let me just say, what intrigues me about what you all are doing here is I had a conversation with my son who is 17 years old. Just recently, I was sitting, one of my favorite things to do, particularly on Sunday mornings, is to sit at my kitchen table with my newspaper and my cup of coffee. I grew up in that era where we still held the newspaper. So the only time they deliver the newspaper to my home is on Sunday, because typically it's in the car when I jump in. I read it on my way downtown. And he came down one day, and I said, you know, he's just standing around, he's pacing around the kitchen table, and I said, you want to sit down and read some of the paper with me? He said, no, I don't read that. So I looked at him, I said, well, how do you know what's going on in the world if you never read the paper? He said, Dad, you are so old-fashioned. Don't you know? He says, if the news wants me to know about it, it comes to me. It doesn't come, I don't go to it. And it made me stop and think. That's exactly how the world has changed, how information is transferred from one point to the next. We no longer have a relationship between our newspaper columnist or our news anchor on television anymore. It's now a two-way conversation. And that the kids today, or young people today, are communicating just as often as the newspaper or the journalist is communicating. I started out in college as a communication journal, broadcast journalist major. And even in the late 1980s, early 1990s, the media has changed dramatically since that time. And so you all are here today as part of this great conference, investigating, having conversation about what's next. And how do we as a nation, as a society, keep up in this new two-way conversation apparatus around news and information sharing? Social media has taken us by storm. It didn't start with Obama, although he certainly perfected it. And as candidates, we think differently as well. When it's time to run for office, it's more than just who can produce the best pamphlet. It's who can go on the social media apparatus and communicate the best in a two-way conversation. That's how you get ahead. The world has changed. And you all are here to continue the conversation about how you stay on top and ahead of all those opportunities. I am so pleased you're here. This is a timely conversation you all are having. I wanted to just come out on behalf of the people of Denver, welcome you to the Mile High City. I want you to have fun. And again, and I mean this with all earnesty, please go out and spend as much money as you can. God bless you all and enjoy our great city.
So I'm just out here to introduce a couple of other speakers. The first person who's going to be coming out now to make a presentation is Joe Torres. He's the author and Free Press Senior External Affairs Director. A lot of you know him. He and Juan Gonzalez co-authored the New York Times bestseller, News for All the People, The Epic Story of Race and the American Media. It's a terrific book. The book, if you haven't read it, it looks at numerous examples of how publishers and broadcasters fomented racial violence and discrimination through their coverage. It's like what I was talking about, how the story creates the story. Joe serves on the board of the Center for Media Justice and the National Association of Latino Independent Producers. Before joining Free Press, he worked as deputy director of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists and was a journalist for several years. Please give a big round of applause to Joe Torres.
Right now, our nation is engaged in a political debate to determine whether our country's immigration system should be reformed. It's a historical moment. It's also a moment when the media has an opportunity to focus greater attention on the impact this debate is having on undocumented immigrants. Instead, too much coverage asphyxiated on political gamesmanship in Washington, or the challenges that politicians like Senator Marco Rubio may face in 2016 for supporting any reform effort. There are so many stories the media could shine a light on if they chose to, but simply ignore. For example, a 2011 report by the Applied Research Center found that more than 5,000 children were placed in foster care after their parents were detained or deported because they were undocumented. It is a story that deserves greater attention. Stories of children being separated from their parents are heartbreaking, and there are thousands of them. There's something unjust when the media covers an issue like immigration as political theater, when there's so much human suffering involved. Instead, when they do cover people of color, they often cover us stereotypically. Latinos are illegals. Muslims and Arab Americans are portrayed as terrorists. Native Americans are drunks. African Americans are criminals. There's nothing new about this. Our nation's news media has a long history of dehumanizing people of color, often in an effort to support unjust government policies, defending slavery, supporting the removal of Native Americans from their tribal lands, conquering Mexican territory in the Southwest, the internment of Japanese American citizens and residents during World War II, and supporting Jim Crow laws. You get the point, the list goes on. You see, this is what happens too often when we are unable to tell our stories when other people speak for us. It is the reason why our nation's first African-American newspaper, Freedom's Journal, in 1827 stated, "We wish to plead our own cause. Too long have others spoken for us. From the press and the pulpit, we have suffered much from being incorrectly represented." It is the reason why many of us are here today, and the reason why Juan Gonzalez and I co-authored the book News for All the People in 2011. We wanted to document why people of color have historically been marginalized in the media and have so little control over the creation and distribution of our own image. This didn't happen by accident. Instead, it is a result of government decisions that place greater control of each new media industry in the hands of a few companies. It didn't have to be this way. Our government has adopted policies. Our government could have adopted policies to promote greater media diversity, rather than allow a few corporate gatekeepers to decide whose voices are worthy of being heard and whose voices are going to be ignored. This is what the struggle for internet freedom is all about. It is a struggle to prevent AT&T, Comcast, Verizon, and other ISPs, internet service providers, from controlling how we can access the internet. But it's also a struggle to prevent history from repeating itself. There's a lot at stake in making sure that people, like everyone in this room here, has the ability to fight for greater media equality, because the fight is a difficult one. The Obama administration and FCC chairman have too often placated corporate ambition rather than stand up to the public interest. The administration had an opportunity to fight for greater media equality, but has been too eager to allow greater media consolidation. It had an opportunity to protect our internet freedom, but caved into corporate pressure, which now places the future of an open internet at risk. This is why gatherings to address our nation's media inequality, like we are doing today, is so critical, whether it is here today or in your local communities back home. Because the fight for a more just media system is a part of the solution for the struggle for a more just immigration system, for a more just financial system, a more just school system, a more just criminal justice system, a more just political system, and a more just society. There is nothing new about the fight for media justice. There's nothing new about the fight for media justice and media reform. The struggle is as old as this nation, and it's not an easy one. We are going up against powerful institutions that shape our culture and society. The fight can seem daunting at times. This is why we have to celebrate our victories along the way. They matter because they impact real people's lives. So we should celebrate when we all come together and work together to stop an AT&T T-Mobile merger. We have to celebrate court victories that prevents the FCC from relaxing ownership rules even further. Or we have to celebrate when Color of Change leads a campaign to get rid of folks like Glenn Beck. We have to celebrate victories by Presente.org and the National Hispanic Media Coalition and other coalitions nationally and locally who said basta to Lou Dobbs. That's Lou Dobbs. We should celebrate the fight to end predatory prison phone practices, which the Center for Media Justice is currently engaging in, as well as other national groups as well and local. And we should celebrate the decision this week by the Associated Press that announced that it will no longer refer to undocumented immigrants as illegal in its style book. Now, this came after protests, years of protests from Latino journalists, as well as a campaign led by the Applied Research Center, the Drop the I-Word campaign. As you can see, the struggle continues. It's a struggle we must have for the sake of our communities and for the sake of our society. But we have a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn from the past to help us inform where we're going in the future. So this is why I'm happy that we're going to continue this discussion right now with a panel where we're going to explore these issues some more. Today's moderator for this discussion is Rinku Sin. She's the president of the Applied Research Center and publisher of colorlines.com. We have Robert McChesney, who is a media scholar and one of the founders of Free Press. We have, is that Carlotta? All right, Carlotta Walls Lanier, author, and one of the members of the Little Rock Nine. And last is Juan Gonzalez, columnist, New York Daily News, co-host of Democracy Now!, author. And I'll join this conversation as well, so.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you, Joe. All right, we have a tight 40 minutes here to spend with you all, and anyone who's ever watched me moderate anything knows that I like to run at a fast clip. So we're going to get right into it. Just a very quick round of introductions of our panel here. This is Bob McChesney. Bob McChesney is a professor at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and is the author of numerous books about media policy, including what I consider a classic, the book Rich Media, Poor Democracy. And next to him is Carlotta Walls Lanier, who at 14 was indeed the youngest member of the crew of high school students who integrated Central High School in Little Rock. And then Juan Gonzalez, daily columnist, co-host of Democracy Now!, author of also numerous books, including the wonderful Harvest of Empire, which is a history of Latinos in the US, and also co-author with Joe of News for All the People. And then finally, Joe Torres, who you've all met. So the way this is going to run is that I'm going to do a first question, the same question that all of the panelists are going to answer. And then we're going to do a round where I ask each of them targeted questions that are geared toward their particular experiences and expertise. And then we'll do another round all together. And we'll see if they're particularly pithy. Maybe we'll have time for one more round or a couple of extra comments or something. So I'm going to start first with this question that I think we'll start with you, Bob, and go straight down. And this is the question I want to know, and the audience wants to know, what is a moment in history, in the history of American media, in the history of media reform, of social movements, that you turn to again and again for inspiration?
Well, you know, when you gave me that question just backstage, you didn't say of media reform.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right. So I thought of an answer that came to mind immediately. And the moments of inspiration for me are always when people get together in large groups to protest, to demonstrate, to show solidarity. When you've ever been part of something like that, it's a feeling that simply is undescribable. The power it gives you, the feeling of warmth and commonality, of solidarity. And I've been lucky to have a few of those in my life, and they recharge my batteries for another decade every time I have one. In 2011, I live in Madison, Wisconsin, and the governor sort of secretly was planning to get rid of public sector unions. And the Teachers Associates, TAA, the Teachers Assistants Union, sort of started marching down, saying, we got to stop this, and they occupied the Capitol. And the next day, literally 5,000 or 10,000 people went down to surround the Capitol, and we stayed there for 6 or 7 weeks. Some of the people here, one of the persons backstage, lived inside the Capitol for weeks to protest and say, you can't take away our basic civil liberties. And I was down there almost every day, and it was simply an undescribable experience because you realize how much people have in common. You realize that we get fed a notion to be scared of each other, to fear each other, to see each other as competitors. And when you get a chance to see that actually we have this much more in common, when we come together, we're so strong. It makes you appreciate why in our First Amendment there are 5 core freedoms. One of them is the right to assemble, and it's every bit as important as any of the others. And nothing scares people in power more than people peaceably assembling outside their windows.
Great, thank you so much. Carlotta?
Very good. I have many thoughts when you gave me that question.
I think I'm going to ask you to pull your mic up a little
I will
closer.
do that. I had many memories. For me, Emmett Till's murder, Rosa Parks, Montgomery bus boycott. In fact, she inspired me for just as a woman. That in particular helped to make me sign that sheet of paper in the 9th grade to go to Little Rock Central High School, understanding what those 2 events had made, and not only that, what I had learned at home, which is the road to success is through education, and you get all the education that you possibly can get. So I had this opportunity, and I took that opportunity. The other memory is receiving that diploma. I am the only female of the Little Rock 9 to participate in the graduation exercises at Little Rock Central High School. And it validated, that diploma validated my 3 years there at Little Rock Central High School. And probably the highest moment is receiving the Congressional Gold Medal in 1999.
Yeah. And can I just reinforce how much all of us in the room owe to that courage that you were able to pull up, wherever it came from. Thank you. All right, Juan.
Well, you know, one of the things that we have to understand that there have been, throughout the course of American history, many efforts and movements at media reform. And one of the things that Joe and I learned as we wrote and researched News for Older People is these incredible movements that have gotten so little attention. I think, to me, because I lived through part of it, and because it was really the most important movement for media reform still in our country's history, is the period of the early 1970s in the United States, which people have not really grasped the importance that the civil rights movement played in media reform as well. Between 1970 and 1973, there were 340 license challenges to the television and radio station licenses of broadcasters across America, largely as a result of the WLBT case in Mississippi that really gave citizens the right to challenge licenses. And as soon as the final court decision was reached in 1969, this huge movement developed all across the country as African Americans and Latinos and civil rights leaders in all these different cities just walked into their local radio stations and their TV stations. They said, we're sick and tired of the way you're portraying our communities. We're sick and tired of the fact you don't have any racial minorities working at these stations, no programs geared to our community. And they began picketing, they began challenging the licenses, and this had an enormous impact on the kind of news and information and media coverage that we had in the early 1970s. All that first generation of African American and Latino journalists, Ed Bradley, Geraldo Rivera, Connie Chung, all the people that we now take for granted, they came as a result of that people's movement. And the doors were opened up. And I think my favorite example, because it happened in public television, and several of my friends were directly involved in it, is in 1972 in New York City, because public broadcasting had been developing for a few years, and part of its mandate was serving underserved communities, but it wasn't. So in New York City, there was no programming on Channel 13 geared to the Latino community, and a group of young Puerto Ricans got together. They all volunteered for the Channel 13 pledge campaign. And you know, in the old days, you have to go into the station, pick up the phones, and take the pledges. So at the given signal, 20 or 30 of them who had volunteered all got up from their phones, sat in the station on the air. Channel 13 had to cut to black. For first and only time in its history, Channel 13 cut to black. They had to call in the police while they arrested all of the sit-ins of their pledge volunteers. And meanwhile, hundreds of people were outside protesting in coordination. As a result, Channel 13 developed the first Latino national PBS program, Realidades, which produced some of the finest programming on the Latino community in American history to this day. To this day. That was as a result of people's struggles. All of these were a result of people's struggles. And I think that's important to understand, that we've got to build these big organizations, media organizations, but we don't have grassroots local struggles. Putting pressure on the media owners at the base, very little gets changed.
Great, thank you. Joe?
Yeah, on a personal note, I think what really changed my life is to understand how important media reform is I was, in the late 1990s, I was working at the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, and all these media mergers were happening after the 96 Act, and I knew it was not good, but I didn't understand why it was no good. And taking the train to work, I was reading Rich Media, Poor Democracy, and I said, that is the reason why I feel the way I feel. And Bob explained it in the book. And, you know, I just feel grateful that I work for a place where the book that inspired me to really begin to try to understand the decisions that are being made and the reason why we have the media systems that we do is because of government decisions. And he explained it in the book, and I understood it. And we talked a little bit about stage. Even though journalists work in an industry, a lot of them have little knowledge about the policy's impact or are willing to even get involved. And then the other moment is, you know, when Juan, in 2002, became the president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. And I was still on staff. And it was at the time when Michael Powell was calling for massive deregulation. And Juan ran on a platform that we're gonna challenge media consolidation as journalists. And that's what we did. And I think of all the journalists of color groups, we were the most aggressive in challenging that. And, you know, I had the honor of working with Juan at NHJ on that campaign. On the history stuff, I'm with Juan on the license challenges. I'll add a different person. There's a guy named William Wright who ran a group called the Black Efforts for Soul and Television. And little has been written about him. We write about him in our book, but he's a dynamic leader. He was trying to train African-American journalists, organizers to challenge licenses. And he was very aggressive in his rhetoric. He's very aggressive in challenging the FCC, and because of his pressure to have an African-American commissioner, that led to the first African-American FCC commissioner. And here we are now in 2013, and we still haven't had an African-American woman chair. And it's the same arguments we're making today that would be made in 1970 on the importance of having people of color at the commission.
Thank you. So that's a great transition, because I want to go to Bob next and ask you actually to talk a little bit about what money and capital has to do with all of this. Most people, in my experience, who decide they want to work in the media or work on the media get into that from a content kind of interest, and not because they're so fascinated by the business end of things. But the business of media has had its own historical arc, and I wonder if you could give us, you know, your 3-4 minute primer on what that is.
Well, I'll try. You know, media has become increasingly important as part of our economy, as people have had greater leisure time, more disposable income over the course of American history, and it has increasingly become an area of capitalist profitability. It's become a major capitalist industry that's grown in influence with every generation. Within capitalist economics, there's a strong tendency for the largest firms to get bigger and bigger, to have more market power because it gives them less risk and higher profits. And so that's a strong tendency that encourages there to be fewer and fewer firms. In addition to that, in media, though, there's government policies which go a long way towards creating markets, and government policies can go a long way towards undermining that concentration power to create multiple voices or encouraging it. And the battle I think that Joe talked about just now has been that a lot of the policy making in Washington has been corruptly run by these powerful firms. So the policies, instead of representing our interests, have multiple voices, and smaller firms has represented their interests, have fewer voices that make more profit. This problem, some people say, well, it's gone away with the internet. No, everyone's got a website. Who cares if Rupert Murdoch owns all the newspapers? I think we should need to be very careful with that argument. If we look at the internet really as the fulfillment and extension of our whole media system, I think it has a very different picture that shows up. Right now, what we see is the internet, which was supposed to be this great creator of competitive markets, is probably the greatest generator of monopoly in the history of any economy. The dominant firms on it, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, all have massive monopolies that create these gushers of profits that they're using to build their empires. And we look at the economy today in the United States, 13 of the 30 largest firms, publicly traded firms, in terms of market value are internet-related companies, the ones I just named and a few others. And to give some sense of how much importance this is in our economy, the too big to fail banks, only 2 of the 30 largest are too big to fail banks. So we have 13 internet firms. So when we talk about dealing with media policy, we're going up against King Kong, Godzilla, and their twin brothers. When we do this fight. That doesn't mean we don't do the fight, but this is in the heart of capitalism, and that's why in my book I argue, when you talk about dismantling this sort of monopoly power and the influence it has over government, you're really talking about reconstructing our whole economy.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Juan, I actually want to go to you next and ask you to talk a little bit about what the racial and class dimensions are of working on media policy, on media issues. The moment in history that you pulled up really is about a community of color asserting itself. And talk to us about, in this age of, post first black president being elected and supposed post-racialism that we're in, what do we learn from our history about the continued role of race and class in our media arrangements?
Well, race and class have always been central to the role of the news media in American society. And I'm talking about from the very beginning. Public occurrences, 1690, the first newspaper in North America, Benjamin Harris, Anabaptist publisher in Boston. When you look at the actual newspaper, you realize that the bulk of the copy of that newspaper, 3 pages, was intelligence to the settlers about what the barbarous Indians or the savages were up to. 5 separate articles in that first newspaper, and throughout the colonial period and into the early years of the United States, a huge portion of the content of local newspapers was intelligence about the Native Americans, as well as about African slaves, about slave insurrections, violence of African slaves against their masters, or disorder created by free blacks in the North. So this has always been a huge subject matter. The white racial narrative has been integral to the development of the press in America, just as the class battle in the press has always been critical. And until the 1830s, newspapers were largely for the elite. There were large sheets. You had to buy them a year ahead of time. Only the upper classes in America read newspapers. Then in 1833, Benjamin Day, a who came out of the working man's press, creates the first penny paper, the first mass circulation paper in America. And that's when the press began to address American urban workers. It's no accident that the mass circulation press arose in America at the very period that American workers were getting the right to vote. Because before then, only those who owned property could vote. In the 1830s, gradually every state abolished property qualifications. So that the mass circulation media in America was a direct response to the fact that the masses had the chance to vote. And one person, one vote is a very dangerous thing, because the masses can vote in ways that the elite don't want them to. So that the mass media in America has always functioned to control the parameters of discussion in the working class. And that's why it's so critical to continue to have independent alternative presses and those that challenge the reigning narrative in the commercial press. And not that the commercial press doesn't sometimes play important roles, but that there's got to be that give and take, because all of the progress in American journalism has come from the dissident press challenging the established press, not just from the labor press, the working men's press of the 1830s. The muckrakers of the 1890s came out of the magazine movement, not out of daily newspapers. The new left press of the 60s and 70s, and of course the progressive bloggers and the non-commercial and alternative media of today. It's always been a battle between the dissident and labor press and the established commercial press over the narrative of what the American people are going to receive in information and news.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting. I was at the University of Michigan recently, and in the audience after the talk I gave, a young woman asked me, she said, well, I see that we have classes on campus that are about African American history or Latino history or women's history. And she said, where do people go to learn about class? I actually, this student wasn't an American. I mean, she was a international student, and she said, where do you go to learn about class? And I said, well, do you have a labor studies program here? And they all said, no, we have no labor studies. And she clearly just had no idea where to go to learn anything about working people, about the clashes between working people and bosses. And I think that clearly has been going on for a long time. Carlotta, let me ask you, during the time that you and the other 8 of the Little Rock 9 were integrating Central High School, and throughout that, the late 50s period of the civil rights movement, the role of black journalists, black reporters actually really got ratcheted up. Can you reflect for us a little bit what that role was and how it related to your struggles?
I will be happy to. Fortunately, we had a paper in Little Rock in the state actually, of Arkansas called the Arkansas State Press, and it was owned and by the Bates, L.C. and Daisy Bates. And Daisy was also president of the Arkansas NAACP. They brought the world to us through the paper. I knew, because of my various civic classes and so forth prior, that there were only 2 African Americans that worked for the big commercial presses, and that was Carl Rowan with Minneapolis Tribune, if I'm not mistaken, and Tom Poston, who I had the opportunity to meet through this whole process. But during our time, if it had not been for the James Hicks of the Baltimore Sun-Times, and especially of the Amsterdam News, and then Newsom of Baltimore Sun-Times, and the Pittsburgh Courier newspaper, the Chicago Defender, that had another offshoot in Memphis called the Tri-State Tribune. They brought the word to us. And basically, that is why Emmett Till stuck out in my mind, because Jet Magazine took the initiative with the okay with the parent, the mother, to show that awful picture, and it left a huge impression on me and my friends that I grew up with. So those things just meant a great deal, and we transcended that and transformed that into the times that Juan is talking about, the Bradleys and so forth. I also like to say that I like to give credit to John Chancellor, and also I would like a paycheck. He cut his teeth a great deal on this Little Rock story and made sure that it got out on NBC, and he had a hard time in doing that. John Chancellor and Frank McGee, along with Benjamin Fine from the New York Times, those people were the ones who had more power than African American reporters and so forth, but they gave of themselves. They really gave their lives to report on what was going on. Alex Wilson, one in particular, was beaten, and his wife really did feel that 2 years later it was because of that he died. Photographers really told the story, and just by, you know, as they say, can't remember the exact quote about the print, 1,000 words. Yes. Yeah, so that really did make a huge impression on not only the African American community, this country. And it's really because of that. It was new. This was all new to our country. There might be a few people out there in the audience that remember when the news was only 15 minutes in the evening. And our story in 1957 was the second most, the biggest story here in the United States, the first being Sputnik. Those were the two largest stories that were talked about and printed about. And it's just something that, you know, it's a part of our foundation and our history.
Great, thank you. Joe? Joe, you were Deputy Director of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists for quite some time. Can you talk to us a little bit about what have been the benefits and challenges of organizing reporters? So it's one thing to be able to do your job as a journalist, and it's another thing to understand the dynamics of power that shape the field in which you're working. What did you find, how did you find people responding as you were trying to build that organization and do your work there?
Well, when Juan was elected president, we began going down this road to challenge media consolidation. We had on the board of NAHJ, we had a Tribune Tribune executive. We had major media executives whose companies were trying to were in favor of greater consolidation. They were lobbying the FCC, saying that this is going to be great for journalism, and so there was a battle on the board. And the thing is, as I said before, a lot of journalists don't understand the history. They don't understand the industry. Like Carlotta is saying, the reason the Latino journalists were able to enter the newsrooms, the black press was an advocacy press. It was a press that they did great journalism. There's nothing dirty about advocacy journalism. It's about truth telling. And Frederick Douglass was an advocacy journalist. Ida B. Wells, Pedro J. Gonzalez. Throughout history, there has been the reason journalists of color were able to break into newsroom. Now, yes, because of the civil rights movement, most definitely the challenges happening, but the black press was a critically powerful institution. And while a lot of folks in white America didn't know much about the black press, our federal government knew a lot about the black press and actually tried to bring sedition charges against it, or threaten them with sedition charges. During World War II, World War I actually brought some sedition charges for being unpatriotic, for challenging the rationale for war, and why are African Americans going overseas to fight for the freedom and coming home to a segregated society. So the idea that journalists these days that work for major media companies and they don't know this history, and all of these associations are sponsored by corporations. The conferences are put on by corporations, and so it makes it a little harder for them to challenge this. And again, they don't. When you go to journalists, journalists say we don't believe the journalists should lobby. A lot of them would say before. But they lobby for a shield law to protect their First Amendment rights to do their job. The arguments that Juan was making, and I was working with Juan on this, is that this is important for the quality of news. Media minority ownership matters is the greatest job promotion to have. Forget about being the publisher or the editor, or being the owner. Is you can determine news coverage and who gets hired. And so we made it a part of that debate too. He tied it to this is actually going to improve the quality of journalism for people of color, and being the owner was the best job promotion you can actually have. So it was definitely a battle.
Thank you. All right. So we have 12 minutes and one more question. And I'm determined not to be the moderator who runs us over time. So just watch the clock. And the last question that is for everybody is, what is the lesson that we can pull out of history to move our work forward now? So we are all here making history every day, things that people will be sitting in a room 20 years from now talking about. And as part of that, let me just thank everybody who has done anything around dropping the I word out of your language, out of the immigration discourse. You did really well, and we made a difference. Something new is going to happen behind that work. So congratulations. So from the panel, and Juan, I think I'm going to start with you. We'll go Juan, Bob, Joe, and we'll let Carlotta have the last word on lessons from history for us moving forward.
Well, I think the key lesson right now for us in a media reform movement is that this movement, if it is going to succeed, must bring together existing movements in the society. The media reform movement cannot travel on one path, while the fight for equality and against racial discrimination goes on another path. Too long in the past, the black press, the Latino press have operated almost, Asian and Native American press have operated almost oblivious, independently, while the commercial and even the white dissident press has operated in a different stream, not even knowing of each other's existence or understanding the important role each play. So that to the degree that there was success in the 70s, it was because the civil rights movement and the media reform movement united. To the degree that there has been not so much unity, and unfortunately right now, the same problem with the journalists is happening with many of the civil rights organizations, is that many of the national civil rights organizations have gotten too close and too cozy with these corporations that fund their scholarships and their building programs and their conventions, and they're reluctant to raise the critical issues to a Time Warner, to a Verizon, to a Comcast. And so we, in the civil rights movement, have to wage a battle within our movement against and to call those national organizations to task and say, unite with the media reform movement. Don't just be worried about the immediate scholarship fund. Don't just be worried about your building fund, because we've got to have a more democratic media. And in the media reform movement, you got to pay more attention to what's going on in the African American and Latino communities in terms of independent press and the differing voices.
Great, thank you, Joe.
I would echo most of that. I just think that, the destiny has been written. I mean, this is going to be a majority, so-called minority nation within 2042, and half of people can be able to trace their origin to Latin America by the end of the decade, which Juan points out in his book, Harvest of Empire. I said this morning at the panel, I truly believe Lonnie Guinier has what she says basically the canary in the coal mine. The canary dies in the coal mine is a warning that the environment is toxic and it needs to change. And she said people of color are often that canary. And we're an early warning system to the rest of the country that there's something wrong with the system. And so if you look at the media inequality that exists today, if we were able to tackle that, it will help to solve the problem of the toxic environment that has an unjust media system for everyone. So, but yeah, so we, like Juan said, we definitely have to pay more attention to that. And destiny has been written, and it's the only way we're going to actually make this change. We have a lot at stake. You know, as Color Lines magazine reports all that. I mean, the amount of wealth we lose, the amount of suffering happening in our communities. We need a media system that's going to be able to solve these great other issues. And so, yeah, our destiny is written. We have to work together.
Right. Thank you. Bob?
Well, I want to just agree with Juan's very important point that we aren't going to win anything substantive in media reform unless it's part of a broad movement that brings together everyone who's concerned about the fate of the society. And I think history shows that unless we're in a period of broad structural change of our society, that's the only way we're going to get structural change of media. It won't happen outside of that. And we always have to keep that in the back of our mind and sometimes in the front of our mind. The most important point I think we should take from history and from the present period is that on every single issue we're working on, the majority of the people of this country are with us, and the more they know about the issue, the more they're with us. We speak for the vast majority of Americans. And this cuts across the ideological terrain, especially when you get away from the labels that are put on positions. This is the liberal position, this is the conservative position. Most Americans don't like the idea of media monopolies in their community. They don't like the idea of there not being newsrooms in their community. They don't like the idea of their children's brains being marinated in advertising. They despise the political advertising that's destroying our elections. They don't like the idea that there's this cartel of cell phone and cable companies that have the highest prices for internet access and the crappiest service in the advanced world. All these things are just, the people are with us on every issue. Our challenge is to mobilize to win on these issues. But we should go with the strength of the conviction of knowing that we've got the wind behind us. They're scared to death of us. That's why they're buying off the politicians. That's why they're rigging the courts. They're rigging the elections. That's why they're trying to make it so people can't vote again, because they know they can't win a fair fight. In a fair fight, we win. Let that power you as you go forward.
Thank you.
I agree with all of that, and it is empowerment as far as that goes. We need to be together. We need to hear all of these issues, but I want to just throw one more piece out there, and that is, do your research. Give the honest information. What bothers me more than anything is just a word or two here and there, and they run with it. And I don't even look at commercial news anymore, very, very seldom, because I'm just tired of what is being given to me in the manner that it is given to me. I feel that there are agenda issues that we need to address, and we need to see the women and people of color more on television and hear what they have to say, because they are bringing the word to the masses of people. I guess it just really goes back to being an honest approach, because if it had not been for what I felt was an honest approach from African American newspapers during my time, who showed me something else other than what I read in the commercial paper of the Arkansas Gazette and Democrat, it broadened my world, actually. And it made me think of things, or want to have things that were more than what I was seeing in front of me. And to me, that was an honest approach. And the Chicago Defender was one of those owners that was around for a very, very long time that did their best to do that. And thanks to the Pittsburgh Courier for the sports end of it, because that's what I think of there. But that is where how I feel about it.
Thank you so much. Mm-hmm. And out of the pieces of inspiration that the four of you shared earlier, I actually pulled a couple of lessons from those that I think might be instructive too. So one is inventive tactics, so really unexpected, surprising, fun tactics that come very organically for your own community, but are surprising to the people that you are challenging. Generating a feeling of belonging so that people want to actually come and get more of that. And then finally, really, that there's just an enormous beauty in groups of people exercising their own power. I think it's one of the most amazing of all human processes. Childbirth might beat it out, although I wouldn't know, but since I don't know about that, I do know about this other thing where groups of people get together and they get to experience each other's beauty in an entirely new way because they are together, in fact. And that is the kind of thing that connects all of us to that history and contemporary times. It's not like there's a box, there's this box, it's history, and then there's this box, it's today. The history and the today are connected. And many years from now, people are going to be talking about us in ways that we hope will give them inspiration and inventive tactics to replicate and most essentially a feeling for their own beauty and an urge to exercise that beauty together, to put that beauty out into the world together. Let's give our panel a big hand. Thank you so much. We're getting off the stage now. We're going that way.
It's good to be back in CMR. The last time I was here, I was brought courtesy of Media Literacy Project, today's New Mexico delegation. And I sent a poem called Open Letter to the FCC to Boston. Now I'm here with you in person, and I wrote a different poem just for you. Open email to the future. Do you remember us? Before I wrote you letters like this in cursive, and you told me I was not your type. Before, when your word had vows, and we had promise, and should have kept both, when we were still stories. Like the one Reverend Vivian still tells about the preachers and their protests, the time we turned that jail cell into a low-power FM, turned us into a one-hit wonder, and those ministers sang us over and over again, even after they were told to shut up, otra vez, even after they were told they'd lose their mattresses, otra vez, even after they were mattressless, they sang us again. Do you remember when we spelled I love you with 10 songs, a cassette, a piece of tape, and a Sharpie? Wrote possible wedding songs on it, scratched that, and wrote I Like You a Lot, Volume 1. And he gave it to her. And she gave one to her. And he gave one to him. And they all had the same 10 songs on it. Back when we thought the digital revolution meant 5-finger instead of fist. Back when music gigs meant something different. Back when we couldn't fit a library of songs in our pocket, but we could in our heart. Back when we actually had to remember phone numbers and stop and ask for directions instead of bitching at Google Maps and still stopping and asking for directions. Back when we had to admit that we were lost, that we didn't know it all. You remember when it was the satanic static in the wax that charmed daddy into drunk dancing instead of damage, when we used to cozy up to the snap, crackle, and pop of the radio just to keep warm, when the walls between family members started wearing moving pictures to give the illusion of spending time together. Remember when knowing what buttons not to push prevented distance and silence? Now, it just prevents silence. When weeknight meant gather around the table for TV dinner with TV parents, and grace went something like this: at least we're not hungry and orphaned. Thank God for the Huxtables in both of Mom's jobs. When Neil Armstrong landed on the boob, when the Challenger moonwalked and moonwalked and moonwalked on instant replay, when space stations started beaming stardust to our rooftops to remind us that we are radiant, when gamma rays only meant one thing, and it was not catching cancer from your cell phone. Just like Lou Ferrigno, forever worried about how big when we should have been worried about how green. Remember when Super Bowl commercials didn't suck? When one bully was enough, but her smartphone is more socially awkward than her, so she keeps a gang in her pocket that pummels her where it won't leave bruises until it mega hurts. This email will self-destruct if the colonizers keep trying to plantation the internet. The airwaves are no place for a slave ship. The people think they are free when they are the cash crop. Remember when we said that we would railroad this superhighway under the ground before we let them take us? Pandora, old Negro spiritual station to pirate information with Dr. King broomsticking Morse code underneath the beat until it was his turn to speak. Remember that we are the First Amendment, the only industry protected by law, lifeblood of the Republic, protecting democracy since long before Ben Franklin went Postmaster General. How could you forget our endangered languages? Native tongue severed, newspaper noosed. Since the telephone is extinct, I wrote you this by hand, worth more to you now as a collector's item, quaint as a stamp, before postage cost an arm and a laptop. You can't forget. The names of dead homies haunt the address book on your phone, their Facebook page a shrine. Relive Newtown in pictures on the screen and call it therapy. So you don't have to relive flashes in your mind and call it PTSD. I wish I was still a piece of paper, not this immortal, this God corporations are trying to bottle and make a wish. Then at least I could be burned. And people would tether together around me again, hands held. The light I'd produce would be warm, not blue, but temporary. And they'd read each other's face, for real, for once. Forever, and then they'd sing. Thank you.
The next speaker is somebody many of you know very well, Kim Gandy. She's the president and CEO of the National Network to End Domestic Violence, where she leads the nation's foremost voice for domestic abuse victims and the advocates and programs that serve them. She previously served as vice president and general counsel at the Feminist Majority and the Feminist Majority Foundation. In 2001, Kim was elected president of the National Organization for Women and chair of the National Organization for Women Foundation and their Political Action Committee. She served as president until being term limited in 2009. She also served as the National Organization for Women's principal spokeswoman and is a well-known media commentator on women's rights, which are obviously in the news right now. After leaving the National Organization for Women, Kim Gandy accepted a resident fellowship at Harvard University's Institute of Politics. She was one of the lead organizers of the 2004 March for Women's Lives and a key organizer of the 1989 and 1992 marches. Kim's expertise in mass action ensured that 1.2 million activists made the 2004 March for Women's Reproductive Freedom the largest and most diverse grassroots mobilization in American history. Kim Gandy is the chair of the Free Press and the Free Press Action Fund Board. Please welcome Kim Gandy.
Thank you, David, for that very kind introduction. Wow, you look fabulous. This is what democracy looks like. As with race issues and the voices of people of color, you all know that women and the voices on gender issues are marginalized in the mainstream media, especially as experts and on the editorial page. Not long ago, the Washington Post, after printing multiple editorials from men excoriating the Obama administration for requiring all employers except churches to cover birth control for their employees as part of the Affordable Care Act. So we offered them an op-ed from a woman for a change who actually thought it was a good idea to cover birth control. Not just any woman. Former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend. We were sure that they couldn't possibly turn down a politician, a practicing Catholic, and a Kennedy whose Uncle Teddy was the wind beneath the wings of the Affordable Care Act. But we were wrong. After weeks of negotiation, they declined to print an editorial from a woman countering their own position. And that is much more the norm than you would think. But don't take my word for it. There are studies, recent ones, on the absence of women's voices in the media. In the coverage of the last election, for example, only 1/4 of the bylines on the front page were by women. And in a study last year, a 2012 study, men were more likely to be quoted on women's issues than women. Specifically, men were more likely to be quoted on the issue of abortion, birth control, and Planned Parenthood than women. More recently, the Steubenville case, the violation of a young woman who was completely unconscious, whose pictures, naked and helpless, were sent far and wide. Where were the sexual assault experts when so many in the media were directing their concern at the young men and how their lives would be ruined? Where were the women who understand these issues? Where were the women who cared about that young woman and her ordeal? I'll tell you where they were. They were online. They were on blogs. They were in communities of our own making, and they were outraged. And it spread like wildfire. It didn't matter what the mainstream media did. The women were out there, and they were talking about it, and they were making it an issue, and they forced the media to look at it. Yet even as women have gone around their exclusion from the mainstream media by building communities online, we risk having other media conglomerates limit our access to that very content. I'm grateful for Free Press's commitment to affordable and accessible internet. But what if in the same way your cable company decides which channels you're allowed to watch? What if your internet provider or your cell phone provider decides what sites you're allowed to visit, or which online communities you can join, or what blogs you can read? What we want and what we deserve is fair and balanced news about the issues that affect our lives, coverage that includes the voices and the experiences of women, especially as issue experts, and media images of women and girls that show us as the full human beings that we are. Thank you for standing with us. I'm so grateful for your passion, for your activism, your commitment, and for standing up for a free, open, and diverse media in this country and around the world. Thank you very much. And now I'm so pleased to be able to introduce our next speaker, someone you will no doubt recognize from her writings and from her television commentary. From pioneering corporate advocacy campaigns at Rainforest Action to directing political advocacy and communications for MoveOn.org to helping Media Matters undercut the power of the right-wing media, Elise Hogue is an expert in advocacy and online engagement with a deep commitment to progressive issues. To my delight, she has turned her considerable talents to the issue of reproductive rights. And 3 months ago, she was named president of NARAL Pro-Choice America. It's a big job, it's an important one, and I know she's up to the challenge. Please join me in welcoming Elise Hogue.
Hey, everyone. I am Elise Hogue. As Kim said, I'm honored to be introduced by Kim Gandy, who has inspired me to do the kind of work that I do. And I am actually thrilled to be here. I have been president of NARAL Pro-Choice America today for exactly 9 weeks. So don't test me on anything. I'm pretty pleased that I haven't burned anything down in the building yet. But when the day that my appointment was announced, Tim Carr from Free Press called me. I wasn't even started yet and said, will you come to Denver? And I said yes. And the reason for that is the reason that I took on the challenge that I've taken on with NARAL. Sorry, I forgot the slides were here. Oh. Nope. Yep, we're having a problem. All right, well, we're gonna not use the slides. How's that? This was an iconic image of 2012. No, turn it back on, guys. You had the right one. Anyway, did you guys see? That was the iconic image of 2012. That was an all-male panel. Sorry. That was an all-male panel testifying before Congress on what? Birth control. Everyone remember that? I mean, clearly they're the experts on oral contraceptives. No doubt, right? The good news about that slide, which is gone now, was that there was a lot of outrage about it when it happened, right? There were protests on the Senate floor, the internet went wild, and that's great. The problem with that is that the outrage indicates that that incident is an outlier. It's not actually an outlier. That's par for the course. That's the norm. As Kim said, there was a study done on the 2012 cycle. In TV news, women were quoted 16% of the time. In print press, we did a little bit worse, 13%. I mean, clearly, we're obviously not intellectually competent to discuss complicated issues like economic inequality or the Electoral College, right? Wrong, of course. But what about when it comes to our own reproductive health care? Good news, we did better. We got 19% of the quotes about abortion in the 2012 cycle. 81% of the quotes about whether or not women should have access to safe and legal abortion in the 2012 cycle came from men. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, what is that picture telling us? That picture says that they think we are not competent to testify about our own experience and our own reality in front of our own government. So if they think we're not competent to testify, they certainly are communicating that we're not competent to make our own decisions about who and when and how we have a family. So what does that translate to, right? We had a 2012 election that was, women made the difference in all these races. Races were run and won on the war on women. What's happened? What's happened since the 2013 legislative cycle started. Anyone know what North Dakota, Arkansas, Kansas, and Montana have in common? Right? In the last 3 months, those 4 states have passed some of the most restrictive legislation on abortion and women's choices. And some of it outright bans abortion. Some of it is just codifying into law harassment and humiliation of women who are exercising our constitutional rights. And what if you're a poor woman? Your chances of telling your own story in the mainstream media are about like your chances of winning the lottery, right? And women of color, we just had a whole panel on race in the media, and certainly I know Rinku will talk more about it. But if you're a woman of color or a poor woman, your representation to the media translates into your access to reproductive justice and reproductive freedom. Poor women and more women of color have not even enjoyed the access to safe and legal abortion because the Hyde Amendment has prevented public dollars from accessing that health care. So, we do have some successes. My favorite moments come when all of the men who are talking to the media forget that we're there, like that we still exist, and they treat the media like their own locker room. Todd Akin, anyone? Right? Todd Akin actually lost his election. Claire McCaskill won. And what happened in that same cycle? We had a very, very brave Georgetown law student talk about the need for universal access to contraception. And Rush Limbaugh, for hours and hours and days, his show went something like this. Sandra Fluck, slut. Sandra Fluck, prostitute. Sandra Fluck, slut. Well, first of all, no, she was actually making a statement about medical necessity around contraception. But 2, so what? Who cares? Women are allowed to have sex when we want to and not have to apologize if we don't want to have children at the same time. And by the way, Rush Limbaugh married 4 times, no kids. Either someone's sneaking the pill, or that's not another reason I don't want to be married to Rush Limbaugh right there. So, and then we had the Virginia transvaginal ultrasound law. Anyone remember that? A lot of outrage about that one. The transvaginal ultrasound law was dropped. But these successes come with costs. How much time did we dedicate talking about legitimate rape that could have been talking about economic inequality, social security, equal pay for women, broadening access to reproductive health and reproductive freedom? Limbaugh, still on the air. And the Virginia bill, they dropped the transvaginal part, but the ultrasound part still stands. And women still have to undergo an unnecessary medical procedure just to access their legal right to terminate an unwanted pregnancy. So what are we gonna do about this? That's why I'm here. You guys are on the front lines of holding the media accountable, and we are going to make them see it. We are going to stand up and be counted. Last week on Meet the Press, when they had 4 men and 1 woman on talking about the restrictive abortion bans in the states, Twitter went wild. My friend Aaron Mattson tweeted like crazy, got a firestorm. And you know what? They will respond. The other thing that we are going to do, and we're already doing, and it's already being done, is we are going to build our own channels. Feministing, Color Lines, Jezebel, Blog for Choice, which is the NARAL Pro-Choice America one. These are the platforms that allow us to own our stories, tell our voices, own our autonomy. And when we own our autonomy, we get to make legislative, electoral, and cultural decisions for ourselves. So next time you link to a piece about women, link from there. Don't link from the Washington Post, and don't link from the New York Times. Think about where the source comes from. I thank you. I am here because when we are working together, you make my work easier to create a safe space for all women to exercise their freedom and their choices, and I want to make your work resonate even more by making sure that we are promoting women's voices and women's media. Thank you so much. Have a great conference.
Staceyann Chin received the 2007 Power of the Voice Award from the Human Rights Campaign, the 2008 Safe Haven Award from Immigration Equality, the 2008 honors from the Lesbian AIDS Project, and the 2009 New York State Senate Award. She unapologetically identifies as Caribbean and Black, Asian, and lesbian woman and resident of New York City. A proud Jamaican national, Staceyann appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, where she spoke candidly about her experience growing up on the island and the dire consequences of coming out there. Staceyann is widely known as the co-writer and original performer in the Tony Award-winning Russell Simmons Deaf Poetry Jam on Broadway. Her poetry has met with acclaim, and she has led writing workshops in Australia, South Africa, and Sweden. Chin's 3 one-woman shows, Hands of Fire, Border Clash, and Unspeakable Things, all opened to rave reviews at the Culture Project in New York City. Whether on 60 Minutes or in the New York Times, Staceyann has a reputation for telling it exactly like it is, and she will tell us exactly as it is right now. Please welcome Staceyann Chin.
How are you doing? I don't usually get like this many journalists, reporters, press people all in the same room. Kind of feel like, you know, you just crashed into this place and corralled you and they're locked in. That's why you have, you know. So I'm going to read just, you know, a short excerpt from my memoir. I was maybe 9 here. And I don't know how it relates to what the fuck is happening here, but I thought it was brave, and I read it all the time, and I think to myself, you know, this kid has some gumption. I feel like I've hit gold when I find 3 dirty picture magazines in the pile of abandoned books under the house. I dust them off to reveal a series of blondes wearing very small brassieres over their very large breasts. I read about women who are excited to discover something called the orgasm. None of the women have any clothes on, and all of them have their legs wide open. I look at the pictures of them rubbing their cocoa breads with shiny red fingernails. It's all very strange and exciting. My heart is beating fast, and then slow, and then fast again. In some of the pictures, the women look happy and sad at the same time, as if they're eating an ice cream cone that isn't really their favorite flavor. Looking at the photographs makes me want to touch myself too. Plus, I want to know if my cocoa bread looks the same as the cocoa breads in the magazine. I decide the only way to find out is to have a look. I choose the one place nobody would find me, the pit toilet, or as you call it here, the outhouse. Day after day, it stands empty until there's a water lock-off. Not much more than a woodshed built over a 20-foot concrete-covered sewage receptacle, the pit toilet is so small that only a makeshift toilet seat of wood can fit inside, and it smells like milk farts all the time. I look down into the hole. There are giant roaches crawling up the inner walls of the seat. Further down, bits of things are floating in what looks like a big, black swimming pool. I climb up onto the seat and slowly squat. My naked bottom hangs over the gigantic opening of the square toilet. I carefully examine my cocoa bread. There are some things that look like mouths keeping a big secret. When I push the mouths open, a tongue pokes out at me. When I poke the tongue, the lips get wet. So I poke the tongue again, and again, and again. The lips get wetter and wetter. I am bouncing up and down so much my foot slips and I fall into the pit. My right leg and right arm are both completely in. The left arm is grasping at the side of the seat. The left leg is caught in a strange angle that has just barely kept me from falling all the way in. I can't call anyone for help. The dirty magazine is sprawled open on the floor with Devil Daisy's bottom cheeks separated by the spine of the open pages. The stench from the waist below makes it difficult to breathe, and there are things I cannot see crawling along my foot. My palms sweat, make it impossible to get a firm grip on the wood. It takes me nearly an hour to drag myself up and out from the mouth of the pit. And when I finally collapse, shaking and picking pieces of roach legs off my hip and thigh, I know I'm never going to look at my cocoa bread ever again. And to kind of echo Hakim's poem, I'm reading my own open letter to, CNN and Fox and the mainstream fucking media. Dear anchors and editors, etc. If you were to summon me for 15 minutes of an on-air conversation on any topic of your choosing, I would arrive on time in my most revolutionary gear, because a few seconds of fame is a lot of power in these times of digitally altered truths. We underground runners flirting seductive with the mainstream have long since known the value of your coveted reviews. But I cannot, and I have to say that I wrote this maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago maybe. I cannot, with any freedom of or integrity of conscience, accept your portrayal of Iraqi stories. I am resisting your sporty reportage of veiled mothers holding malnourished babies still warm from the bloody bullet pushed patriotic through their already ailing bodies. Your headlines remove the dignity from poor people's dreams when you endorse the bombing of Baghdad or Basra or Qasr. We know nothing of these places but what you choose to tell us, and your arrogance scrolling across the bottom of my screen, fictional accounts embedded in the jaunts of journalists joyriding on the backs of tanks, the old lie painted on the faces of those boys barely fucking yet. Dulce et decorum es. Honor cannot dry the tears of a mother, a wife, a daughter with a folded flag standing in for a father. These are the horrors of a story still unfolding, of tiny fingers exploding, still holding seasoned rice, the terrors of every war, and still you cannot tell me what we are still fighting for. Information is a weapon, and you, Vox Populi turned propaganda machine, have turned the nozzle against us. Nothing is to be trusted in your make-believe real TV movies. I'm tired of flipping from correspondent to dishonest correspondent. Your tall tales of metal statues falling are new. American Idols are not new. American Idols fall all the time on primetime TV, and in between we watch young black men eating raw testicles of buffaloes while presidents give speeches that inject pride into a more shameful history than you or I are willing to admit. We pay too much for your opinions disguised as news. You are no different from your politicians jerking off in the mouths of underage population. We are tired of your backhanded rhetoric, your logo-printed views. We need a force who is unafraid to present events as they occur. And I'm really thinking we need more than your carefully crafted letters here. It's better first to whisper the revolution from ear to ear. Better to turn the volume down and have more sex. Better to fuck than to tuck our bare feet under the inertia of these misled masses. Better to stick our tongues up each other's asses than sit on our couch with our mouths open wide, inhaling the funk of your artificially expelled cacophony of noxious, poisonous gases. So I wrote this one because at one point I was like, when I was kind of becoming known and, I started having fans and started having more Facebook likes and what the fuck, I was like, oh my God, I have to be careful about what I say now because I have to be careful how many times I say fuck or, whatever. I have to be more careful and more careful and more fucking careful. And I'm thinking, I really need to write something that is about being less careful. So I wrote this one, just to kind of jolt myself into kind of remaining honest and saying how I feel and why I feel it and blah, blah, blah. I'm preaching to the fucking choir here, right? These These walls of unthinkable opportunities carved close around my mounting ambitions. Performer pushing against performer, publishers pricing the fruits of our strange struggle towards honesty. There was a time when rebellion and poetry required nothing to sustain each other. Poets dwelled among poets. We were all willing to die for the word. We were writers wanting to live for little else, and these overused cliches were lines we all believed in. We were just looking for a better way to write them. Back then, I would have challenged that Jamaican woman in my doctor's office shouting, "Faggotism is that disease we need to be cured from." Without thinking, I would have moved to correct her wrong. With so many black faces in that room, I would have known how important it was to be out as a lesbian. But these days, my lips are stuck to the ass crack of that mini-dick executive deciding how much I will earn this year. I can't seem to forget that he could easily make me the first famous Caribbean-American lesbian diva, have me cuss you out in 2 languages, tell you about your motherfucking bumper rascal, two-faced nigger bitch, homophobic, racist cunt. Self, that image is easy enough to digest for those plugged into the idiot box. Revolution is acceptable when folded into programming. We have all been closing our eyes against this flash of light the religious right keeps blaming on the poor Muslims. Ignorance is the greatest danger we can pass on to our children. Kermit and the Cookie Monster are not enough anymore. Sesame Street wasn't that diverse anyway. It was never really okay to be green. No racism on that multicultural blue screen. Back then, I wasn't an almost American. Yes, red and blue and white stars still stood for freedom. Back then, I was still grooving to Langston and Brathwaite and the blues. Back then, hope was the blood that fueled my veins. Why was never the question. It was always when. When do you think we were going to do the impossible? And when do you think we could surpass that? And I want to make my way back to when the laughter was more than the joke. Back when freedom fighters were yoked by callous hands and careless feet. Back when art and the man were 2 separate issues. Back when art and the man were 2 separate issues. Back when writers wrote. Back when writers wrote what they wanted, regardless of money. Back when the blues was laced with something sweet. Back when the blues was laced with something sweet, like the war cry of revenge, and the writers called that shit jazz. And white people still wondering how that nigger noise got up under their skin, and the dancers called it jazz. And the future was a flexible skyscraper we all were constructing jazz. Black bodies moving sexy under the color of an assumed night like jazz. I want to write like jazz without the pump, jazz without the ceremony, jazz without the bony hip of some MTV model competing with my pen. I want to travel back to way back when the blues was the ache of a landless people. Back when the dust was not so thick over our dreams. I want to live in that. I want to live in the baseline. I want to live in the baseline of that forgotten generation. I want to hear the screams of Billy and Nina and Zora and Jazz. I want to go to bed with Coltrane and Miles and Domino and Jazz. Fuck you, Mr. Big Time Record Producer. Duke Ellington played his jazz. Fuck you, Mr. Casting Director. Charlie Parker played his jazz. Fuck you, I'm gonna pimp you for your art till we can no longer make money from you. Jazz, I will not let you kill the rhythm in my jazz. I'm gonna play it. Jazz, I'm gonna play it. Even if I die poor. Jazz in an unmarked grave. Jazz like Zora Neale Hurston. Jazz away from my own people, Nina Simone. Jazz, I'm gonna play it like Nina, like Ella, like Sarah, like jazz. I'm gonna play like Nina, like Ella, like Sarah, like jazz, like freedom, like fighter, like fuck you, like jazz. Gonna play like freedom, like fighter, like fuck you, like jazz. Gonna play like freedom, like fighter, like fuck you, like jazz. Haiku on Bush's 2nd term. How can you fuck up so many times and still be voted president? So, the left wing, I came into politicization in the late 90s, you know, I came out as a lesbian in Jamaica, and some shit happened, and you know, I got assaulted by about a dozen boys in Jamaica and decided, you know, I'm going to come and run nymph-like through the, you know, the kind of socially free topography of the American terrain. So I imagined myself, you know, flitting, you know, through the meadows of New York City, you know, with other lesbians. We would all be dressed in white, kind of like just, you know, smelling like patchouli and running around being like lesbian, you know? I don't know, it's what I imagined. And then I came to New York, and I was like, shit, I'm black. Fuck, man. This is some shit. And then there's this thing called being an immigrant. And like, women aren't that free in America, man. Shit. Fuck. What am I gonna do? And then I started being a poet. You know, and the reason I started being a poet is because I started listening to radio stations like WBAI and voices like Amy Goodman, and I started reading writers like June Jordan and reading the works of Audre Lorde, where I knew something wasn't right. And I started traveling across this country and kind of meeting in rooms like this, where when you say shit like, you know, the shit ain't right, and like sexism and homophobia, and like, give me the fucking rights to my body, and I want my daughter to be able to wear whatever she wants to wear. And people don't look at you strange, you know, it's like, every day out in the world, you're doing like feminist 101, racism 101, like every fucking thing 101. So, you know, you know, I'm tickled pink to be in a room of people who are, even if you don't self-identify as leftist, the mainstream media would call you leftist. So this is a letter to my leftists. It's a rant for my leftist people here. This is for us, inside joke, you know. If I read this out in the world, they'd be like, huh, I don't know what they're talking about. But this is between us. So thank you very much. I'll also be outside signing books right after this for those of you who want to, are independently wealthy and want to like promote, you know, put your money where your fucking politics is, buy shit that is not like, you know, out in the world, blah, 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 blah. Here we go. Being queer has no bearing on race, my white publicist says. True love is never affected by color. I curbed the flashes of me crashing across the table to knock his blonde skin from Manhattan to Montego Bay to bear witness to the bloody beatings of brown boys accused of the homosexual crime of buggery. Amidst the newfangled fads and fallacies, the New Age claims that sexual and racial and gender freedom has finally come for all. These under-informed, self-congratulating, pseudo-intellectual utterances reflect how apolitical the left has become. It is now commonplace to hear young activists say the terms black and lesbian and radical and progressive come across as confrontational. Tongue and courage tied with fear, I am at once livid, ashamed, and paralyzed by the neoconservatism breeding malicious amongst us. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, ally, questioning, two-spirit, non-gender fucking conforming. Every year we add a new letter. Yet every day, I become more and more afraid to say black or woman. Every day, under the pretense of unity, I swallow something I should have said about the epidemic of AIDS in Africa, or the violence against teenage girls in East New York, or the mortality rate of young boys on the south side of Chicago. Even in friendly inside conversation, I have to rein in that bell hooksian urge to kill motherfuckers who say stupid shit to me. All day, bitter branches, all day, bitter branches of things I cannot say out loud sprout deviant from my neck. Fuck you, you fucking racist, sexist turd. Fuck you for crying about homophobia while you exploit the desperation of undocumented immigrants to clean your hallways, bathe your children, and cook your dinner for less than you spend on a tax-deductible lunch. I want to scream out loud. All oppression is connected, you dick. At the heart At the heart of every political action in history stood the dykes who were feminists, the anti-racists who were gay rights activists, the men who believed being vulnerable could only make this community stronger. As the violence against LGBT people increases, where are the LGBT centers in those neighborhoods where the assaults occur most frequently? As the tide of the Supreme Court changes, where are the marches to support a woman's right to an abortion? And what are we doing about health insurance for those who still can't afford it? HIV/AIDS was once a reason for gay white men to act up. Now their indifference spells the death of straight black women and imprisoned Latino boys. Apparently, if the tragedy does not immediately impact you, you don't give a fuck. A revolution once pregnant with expectation flounders, apathetic and individualistic. No one knows where to vote or what to vote for anymore. The faces that now represent us have begun to look like the ones who used to burn crosses and beat bulldaggers and fuck faggots up the ass with loaded guns. The companies that sponsor our events do not honor the way we live or love or dance or pray. Progressive politicians still dance around the issue of gay parenting, and the term marriage is still reserved for those unions sanctioned by a church-controlled state. For all the landmarks we celebrate, we are still niggers and freaks and faggots and minstrel references for jokes created on the funny pages of a white, middle-class, rich, heteronormative world. The leftist manifesto, the current leftist manifesto, is a corporate agenda, and outside that agenda, a young boy dressed in drag is swallowing someone else's semen so he can pay for dinner. A woman is beaten every 12 seconds. Every 2 minutes, a girl is raped somewhere in America. And while we stand here well-dressed and rejoicing, in India, in China, in South America, a small child cuts the cloth to construct your new shirt, your new shoe, that old imperialism held upright by the misuse of impoverished lives. Gather round, ye fags, ye dykes, ye trannies, ye progressives, all those committed to radical social change. We are not simply at a political crossroads. We are buried knee-deep in the quagmire for a battle for our very humanity. The powers that have always been have already come for the Jew, the communist, the trade unionist, the terrorist. The time to act is now. The time to speak is now. The time to blog is now. Now, while there are still ways we can fight these motherfuckers. Now, because the rights we have left are still so very few. Now, because it is the right thing to do. Now, before you open the door to find they have finally come for you.
Staceyann Chin. Whew. All right, folks, we're about to wrap up. I got one more T-shirt I found backstage, so I think I got it to you there. Can you believe we're just getting started? Thank you all for being here. Lots of stuff happening tonight. Denver Open Media Tour, don't miss that. Ai Weiwei Film, 7:30 here, don't miss that. Most of all, do not miss the dance party. Don't do it. I wrote it on this hand. 144 West Colfax, the McNichols building. Hank Shockley is going to be there. Kitty Crimes in the building, the McNichols building. DJ Ginger Perry, you want to be there. There are rumors of a media reform, media justice dance-off. I can't promise, but you won't know if you don't come. Last little bit of housekeeping. I want to introduce you to my friend John. I want to bring the house lights up, please. I want to ask those of you here, the hardcore, to stand. I want you to stand, move toward the aisles. Stand. You're not standing. Well, you got to stand first if you can. Okay. This isn't a Q&A situation. Okay. So what we're going to do, this is John. He's the official NCMR photographer. You and I, the people of NCMR, hard for me to say, we're going to take a little picture. So is that cool? When I get down there, you'll say cheese, he'll take the picture? Yes? Okay, let's do it. Go! All right, we did it. Oh, we're still doing it. We'll see you tonight. We'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Thank you, thank you, thank you.